Hello there, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel today. Today I have a process video for a layout that I made using the My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit for January. I'm starting off with a whole bunch of strips of different widths, but mainly 1/2 inch and 1 inch. And I am using some distress ink in fossilized amber, and I ink the edges of all those pieces. I took a piece of cardstock, of white thick cardstock, and I put some ETG adhesive all over it, and I'm lining up all of those strips of paper. Before I started attaching those strips down, I had already decided on what order I wanted to attach the strips to the paper in, and I tried to not put too many of the same pattern papers near each other, and I tried to vary the widths too. I trimmed those strips so they were all even, and then I added a little extra Distress Oxide to the edges. For this layout, I'm using one of the subscriber cut files, and this cut file is made by Pear Tree Cut Files. It says Everyday Moments. I cut out this cut file 2 times. I backed one of the cut files with some of the pattern papers from the kit. Some of the pattern papers were from 49 in Market, and then there were a whole bunch of papers from the Simple Stories Simple Vintage Weathered Garden collection. When I cut the cut file out the second time, I removed the cut lines that were inside the letters that make up moments. And I'm attaching these 2 cut files together because I want the cut file to be a little bit more sturdy. I'm going to be doing some hand stitching on the word moments, and I wanted to make sure that the paper was thick enough for me to stitch on. Sometimes I find if the paper's too flimsy, the stitches will start breaking through the side, and I definitely don't want that to happen. For my background, I'm going to be using this beautiful piece of paper from 49 in Market that was in the kit, and I just put some white splatters on top of it. I'll be using that to assemble the layout in a few moments. I'm going to use this piece of pink paper to mount everything to, but you won't see the pink in the end. I'm going to be putting the majority of that strip of strips on the bottom, and then I'm using a small strip of it on the top. And there's that 49 in Market paper that I added the splatters to. So this is going to create the background for my layout. I put some ATG adhesive, and I make sure that the strips of paper are matched on the top and the bottom. Now, I'm not going to stitch on the word every day, but I really don't like large areas of white on my layouts, and maybe this doesn't look like a large area, but it was large enough for me that I wanted to add something to it. So I'm using a Tim Holtz stencil. I believe it's called Dot Fade. I use this stencil quite frequently when I want to add a little bit of texture to something. And I use some Liquitex modeling paste, and I'm using my palette knife, and I'm just scraping away some of the modeling paste from the side of the word everyday. I had a little mishap. The word everyday broke in 2 as I was stitching the word moments. I kept flipping the cut file over and back as I was stitching, and eventually it wore the word everyday, or the Y on the word everyday, until it broke into 2 pieces. So that is a pretty easy fix. I cut out another one of the cut files, and I cut off the word moments, so I was left with the word everyday, and I'm gluing that on top, and that attaches everything together. And I spent a little bit of time making sure that the letters are all lined up. I don't want them to look offset once the glue dries. And then finally, I add the top layer, which is the word everyday with the texture paste on it. And again, I line up all the layers and I press them together, and the cut file is finally complete. So I put that on the layout, and I'm using a 4x4 inch photo of a little chipmunk that used to come up on our porch. I'm putting some pieces of pattern paper behind the photo. I wanted to have some layers behind the photo. I cut some pieces of pattern paper, and I'm layering those behind the photo. I cut them in L's because that way I don't waste paper by having it behind the photo, and you wouldn't see that anyway. I use the edge of my scissors, and I distress the edges of the paper. And I wanted to mention about this little chipmunk. We don't have any chipmunks that come up on our porch anymore because now we have 3 dogs. We lost our dog Onyx in the spring, and then we didn't get more dogs until the following fall. So we had a summer where the chipmunks were all over, and we used to leave them some berries and some other foods that we thought were healthy for them. And they were so cute, and they got really, really friendly, and I kind of miss them. Maybe I can leave some berries for them on the front porch because my dogs don't tend to go out the front door of the house. On the layers of paper that I'm putting behind the photo, I'm using fossilized amber again to ink the edges of these papers. And a lot of the papers that I'm using are scraps that I had after I cut out all of my strips and after I backed the cut file. I find that both using a cut file and using paper in these thin strips, those are great ways to use up scraps. I distress the edges of all the papers, and then I also bend and tear some of the papers with my fingers. It just heightens the distress a little bit. And I thought that around the photo would be a good place to add an extra distressed look. I tucked the photo behind the cut file on the right-hand side of the layout. I'm using 2 strips. These are from the 49 and Market papers, and I used 2 different punches for these. I used an EK Success punch for the larger scallop, and then I use a Fiskars punch for the smaller scallop that's on the top of the layout. The piece of paper that I punched the larger scallop from was longer than 12 inches because I attached 2 different strips of paper together in order to make that piece of paper. So I inked the edges of both of those scallops with the fossilized amber Distress Oxide again. And then I thought that it would add a nice finishing touch to add a very, very thin strip of paper. This is a slightly darker piece of pattern paper, and this is also the 49 and Market paper. So I thought that I would ink the edges of this very thin little finishing strip, and I'm going to place those at the base of both of those scalloped borders. When creating a border strip, I found that some of my punches will create a very, very thin strip of paper, and sometimes it doesn't punch out perfectly, so I just throw it away with all of the other scraps that are created from punching. But this time, it was a really nice, clean piece, and I tried it on the edge of one of the scallops, and I thought it looked really nice, so I used that on one of the scallops, and then I just cut a thin piece of paper to go on the other one, and I like that effect. Now it's time to attach that cut file down to the layout. I'm using some ATG adhesive, but I also later go back and use some wet glue too. The back of the cut file has some Scotch tape on it, and I use the Scotch tape to hold down some of the loose threads. I didn't want to cut them too short, so the Scotch tape did the trick and holds them in place behind the letters. Now I'm going to start embellishing the layout. For this layout, I mainly use flowers and leaves. These leaves were fussy cut from one of the 49 and Market papers, and the white flowers were fussy cut from one of the Simple Stories papers. And then we have some dimensional flowers. Those are from 49 and Market, and all of this was in the kit for this month. I use a piece of chipboard that says "Enjoy Today," and I put that over the cluster that I created on top of the strips at the bottom of the layout. And on those leaves and branches that I fussy cut out, I left a little border of a yellowish tone because I knew that if I cut the leaves all the way down to the green, they wouldn't show up really well against the dark green background. I'm adding in some more fussy cut flowers, and then I always think that butterflies are a great addition to any page, especially a page that has flowers on it. So I'm kind of sprinkling those butterflies around the page, and I'm adding them to the clusters of flowers. I also put some chipboard hearts on the title. They are a yellow checkered pattern, and I have one between the E and the V on the word everyday, and then one on the S of moments. I begin attaching everything down to the layout because I'm happy with the composition and the way that I have all of the embellishments arranged. So I mainly use ATG adhesive, but for the flowers, I use some wet glue because the ATG adhesive can only hold them in place temporarily. I cut back the white border on this butterfly just a little bit. I wanted a white border, but I wanted it to be a little smaller than it was. And then I add a little bit of fun foam to the back of the butterfly just to pop it up a little bit. I continued to glue all of the items in the clusters down to the layout until everything was attached down, and I did pop up one of the butterflies in the bottom cluster on some foam. and I moved those hearts around a little bit, and this is where they're going to stay. And then I wanted to add a little bit more white to each of the clusters, so I used some of these smaller flowers that I fussy cut from one of the Symbol Stories pattern papers, and I added those to the cluster. Now my favorite touch, I'm adding some photo corners to the photo. I punched out 4 photo corners using my EK Success scalloped photo corner punch, and I inked the edges again with the fossilized amber, and now I'm adding some adhesive to attach those photo corners down to the photo. And even though you only see a little bit of it, I put one in the lower left-hand corner because a little tiny bit of the photo corner is visible through the middle of the A and the Y. Off camera, I added some very tiny pearls to the 2 chipboard hearts. And now I'm adding some of these florals to each of the clusters. I use a very light colored pattern paper and a die that was in my stash, and I die cut out a number of these florals, and I really like the way these look added to each of these floral clusters. I'm adding some pearls to each of the photo corners, and I put a little glue down to make sure that they stay put. And I don't put a pearl on that 4th photo corner, but I am going to put some pearls on this scalloped piece. So I use a medium-sized pearl, a little bit larger than what I probably use on most of my layouts because that's a large scallop. And then I use some really very tiny pearls, and I add those to each of those tiny scallops on the top of the layout. And I like that little detail. I think that it adds a little bit of a different material to the page. I have so much paper on it right now, and I like to have some different textures and materials on the page. And it's a little bit harder to get the pearls down once you've added all of the embellishments to the page, but on the positive side, you don't have to add as many pearls because you don't have to add them in places that aren't going to show. And I use a lot of these pearls, especially these very, very small ones. And I'm not on the verge of running out, but I do go through them very, very quickly. I use my scissors to help me put those really small pearls down. I have trouble just using my fingers because they're so tiny. They end up sticking to my fingers rather than sticking to the layout. I placed one of the same size pearls that I used on the large scallop on the lens of the camera. And now I'm going around the layout with my gel glue, and I'm gluing all of those floral die cuts down to the layout. Then I put a little bit of glue under each of those pearls that are on top of those chipboard hearts. Then I was thinking that it might look nice if I put some very small pieces of the die cut florals around the cut file. I didn't want to take the focus away from the floral clusters, but I wanted to add a little bit of detail around the cut file and kind of bring it together with the rest of the page. So I tuck those small pieces in various places all around the cut file. And I cut out some of the footage of me putting those little floral pieces on the layout because it goes on for a long time. But then I use my gel glue and I attach all of them down to the page. And that was the last touch. That completes this layout. And here are some close-ups. Thank you very, very much for watching this video, everybody. I really, really appreciate it. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please take a look in the description box. You'll find a link to the My Creative Scrapbook website. You can check out all of the kits that they have available, and they have beautiful new kits every month. I hope that everybody has a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.